Hi there, my name is Abigail Drapelick, and I'm presenting today on Interviewing Basics, How to Make a Great Impression. So like I said, my name is Abigail, and I'm actually one of the program coordinators working in the Career Services Office at the UW Green Bay main campus. So yeah, I offer services ranging from resume reviews to mock interviews to preparing to apply to graduate school. So certainly feel free to use our services and take advantage of all of the events and programs that we offer. So what is an interview? It's time to just get back to basics and make sure we're all on the same page of the basic meaning here. So an interview is a formal meeting where questions are asked in order to find out whether applicants are suitable for a position or an academic program. A successful interview can really be the strongest factor in a hiring decision. On the flip side, an ineffective interview can end your consideration for a position pretty quickly. So it's really important for you to make sure you're practicing and preparing adequately for your interview. Your interview is your best chance to make a case for yourself and to really shine. It's an opportunity for employers to evaluate your qualifications, your goals, and how you fit with their organization. It's really a mutual exchange of information, right? Sometimes students, if they haven't interviewed before, they kind of treat it more like an interrogation, like it's something that they're going to get just drilled on. But really, it's supposed to be a little bit more conversational than that. And it is an opportunity for you to really share about yourself and why you're interested in the position and why you think they should select you. It's also your best opportunity to evaluate the organization and the position. So you want to really think about some good questions. Typically, at the end of the interview, they'll ask what questions you have, and you want to be ready to also assess in your mind, like, can I see myself here? Am I impressed with them? So it's good to think about that as well. So there's some different types of interviews. Typically, you'll have some sort of a screening interview. I've heard of these being as short as 5 minutes or as long as 30 to 45 minutes or longer. This is typically your first interaction, besides submitting your application with the employer. And again, it's generally a pretty general format and relatively short. It's just that kind of initial screening that they do of the candidates. And then if from that they're still interested, they usually set up some sort of a phone interview or in-person interview or some sort of virtual call or virtual video interview. Subsequent interviews, that's really however many interviews are happening between that initial screening and the final round. And truly, there is no cut and dry number of interviews. Truly, like, all employers have different processes, so you kind of just have to be ready for anything. Typically, whenever you're in an interview, one of your questions can be, what are the next steps? What's next in the process? Asking a question like that can maybe help you glean how far into the interview process you are and what might be in store. I've had people, have one 30-minute interview and get a job offer based on that. I've had others have, 5 interviews, 2-hour, 3-hour, up to 8-hour interviews, depending on, again, your field, right? Depends a lot on the field of the format of how they're doing. Or things like, if you're going to be a teacher, part of your interview is you actually teach a class to showcase, your teaching style. So there's a lot of different things depending on your field. So I would highly encourage you, as you progress in your coursework, to just kind of ask those questions, network with professionals, and part of what you're asking for them when you ask them for advice or ask them about their jobs, just make that a habit to ask, what's the typical interview process that you've seen in your field, or anything that you would recommend a student who's going to be going into the application process after graduation, anything that you would recommend that they do to prepare especially. You might run into group interviews. This is when you're interviewed with a group of individuals, kind of like a search committee. So meaning there's a group of interviewers interviewing you, or it could mean that there is a group of people getting interviewed at the same time, so a group of interviewees. Um, if you are part of a group interview and they aren't going around and asking every single person to respond to each and every question, I would recommend that you make sure that you are kind of being a little bit more assertive and making sure you speak up, because typically they're kind of assessing who in the group is confident and not afraid to go ahead and speak up. So I would just recommend that, especially if you get the sense that, okay, they're asking questions and I really need to take the initiative to show that, I can go ahead and I'm not afraid to be in the spotlight, sort of a thing. And then there's meal interviews. So attending dining etiquette events, which Career Services hosts each semester, is really helpful just to kind of learn that dining etiquette. I know we all probably think we know basic table manners, but when you think about that higher pressure setting, wow, my interview is taking place at a lunch, at a restaurant. What is the polite thing to order? What do I do with these extra forks that are on the table because I'm not used to going to such a fancy restaurant on my college budget? Things like that. And then also, when you do get a job, when you get invited to networking events, business meetings that take place with involving food, you just want to definitely not embarrass yourself or commit some sort of a faux pas just because you didn't know the proper dining etiquette. So we highly recommend that you take advantage of all of our dining etiquette events through Career Services to really kind of learn those caveats and nuances when it comes to making a good impression and anything that involves a meal at work. So what should you do to prepare for an interview? The first thing you need to do is practice. I mean, interviewing's awkward. We don't usually exchange information. We don't usually talk about ourselves and get peppered with questions, right? So it's a different environment to be in. It's always going to be nerve-wracking just because, you're applying for a job. It's a little bit higher pressure of an environment, even if the interviewer is like super friendly and you feel like you are a great fit. You're always going to be a little bit nervous. There's always room for improvement when it comes to interviewing. I personally was a graduate assistant, so I was an intern working in Career Services helping students with mock interviews and stuff for a whole year. And then when I graduated grad school, even I myself, after all of that experience, did 5 mock interviews to make sure that I was ready for the real thing. A lot of times you think you're going to know how you're going to respond and you think you have some solid examples to talk about, but when you're in that moment trying to articulate those thoughts and coming across, the best way possible, it does take some practice, and it's much easier if you're not doing that the first time when you're sitting in front of the hiring manager. Next, you want to research the company, research the job, research common interview questions that might be asked, research the culture. If you know someone who works there or know someone who knows someone who works there, ask about the company. Any intel you can get that will help you show that you are sincerely interested in the company, that you've actually spent some time researching what they're about and being aware of their mission. And just make sure you've done your research because they can tell when you haven't. Self-assess, so review your experience, think back to what are my hard skills, what are my soft skills, and then really come up with a lot of examples and stories that you can share in response to interview questions. A lot of times they're going to be asking you to describe a time when, to share about a time when. So you really want to comb back through your experience and see when are times that I've risen above and beyond what I needed to do? What are times that I've mitigated conflict successfully? What are times that I've managed my time? What are times when I've made a mistake and what did I do to make it right? You really want to parse through all of that and make sure that you have a ton of really solid, good examples that you can use to make your responses strong. Think about strengths, characteristics, qualities, anything that you really want that interviewer to come away from that conversation remembering about you. You just want to make sure you're really adding that in so you have well-rounded responses. Use the STAR technique to help you formulate logical, strong, informative responses. We're going to go into the STAR technique in a couple slides here. Other opportunities to practice at Career Services, we have mock interview day each semester. That's when you sign up for a 30-minute time slot for generic, very commonly asked interview questions. And actually, we have professionals and employers that come and volunteer to help with that. So you'll have a real employer interviewing you, and then they'll give you some feedback. If you're more interested in an hour-long mock interview, you should schedule one with a career counselor in our office because we will tailor it to your field. So I always recommend that students do mock interview day once a semester, every semester. That if you really need the practice, or at least do it once. And then if you felt like, I got this, then you can move on and definitely do an hour-long mock interview with a career counselor when you're close to graduation and you have some really clear ideas on the kinds of jobs you're applying for. And we'll make sure it's simulated as much as it can be to that field and that profession that you're interested in. So you're going to want to wear professional attire, right? This is how we show respect for an organization, is that we dress up. Make sure you think about your outfit a little bit in advance, right? We tend to forget, like, oh, we might need to do some dry cleaning or ironing or mending. Maybe what we think, oh, we'll just wear what we wore to our last interview, but that was winter and this is summer and that's no longer seasonally appropriate. So just make sure you're doing that in advance so that you have the time to do anything you need to your outfit. Like, that's the last thing you want to be stressing about when you're on your interview day. And then a lot of students will tell me, I was a little embarrassed because I was the most dressed up person there. Like, nobody else was wearing professional clothes as me. And I'll say, honestly, that's normal today. Today's culture, most workplaces are a little bit on the casual side as far as attire. But when we talk to employers, they still see it as a sign of respect on the interviewee's part to come to an interview dressed professionally, even if that's not necessarily what their dress code would be if they were hired. So if you feel like, oh, I'm the only one who's dressed up here, that's normal and that's a fine thing. So here's a visual of some business casual outfits so that you can kind of glean the difference between business casual and business professional. And here are some business professional. I would say business professional dressed is the best for interviewing, or as close to that as you can be. Yeah, so you're noticing more suits, darker colors, more neutral, a little bit more polished look. That's what you're going to go for a professional interview. If you need some professional clothing but don't really want to go out and spend money on it, we totally get it. So we've started the Career Closet. Students can get 5 free professional clothing items each semester of college. So if you think about it, if you start early, you could have quite the professional wardrobe built up by the time you graduate, so you don't have to blow your first paycheck on professional clothes, right? Yeah, so this semester, the Career Closet is by appointment for safety reasons. So you can request an appointment through our website and you can come on in and browse the closet and pick out your items. Things to bring to an interview: a Padfolio, notebook, folder, pen. Those are very standard. Always bring 1 to 3 copies of your resume. A lot of times, no, the interviewer won't necessarily expect you or need you to bring that. It's really just if that moment arises where somebody doesn't have a copy or didn't have time to print it and you can show that you're conscientious and had that copy already ready for them. Other items you want to bring: notes, portfolio. Depending on where you're going, they might have sent you a parking pass or parking instructions. Definitely bring a map and written directions, because you never know when your phone might die and you don't want to be lost, making you late or causing you to miss your interview. What a nightmare. Things like chapstick, mints, like a cough drop if you think you're going to be doing a lot of talking and you might need that. Professional looking jacket, umbrella, briefcase, tote, handbag, water bottle. You get the drift. And then make sure you bring your very best good manners, because proper professional etiquette is super important in life, but definitely under the microscope at the interview. Your attitude and behavior towards others are just as important as your resume, experience, education, and training. Employers are really selecting individuals who have not only have job-related experience, but who they believe will be a good fit for their organization, for the other employees that are working there, for their clients and their stakeholders. So they're really looking for the human qualities that make for successful work and relationship building, right? Courtesy, respect, trust, reliability. Manners and respect are the underlying foundation of good relationships, and good relationships translate to professional success. So, what are these interview etiquette practices? Okay, so I'm just going to say this disclaimer that United States professional culture for interviewing is quite different from other countries. So, what I'll talk about right now is if you're going to an interview in the United States. If for some reason you are interviewing abroad, I would highly recommend that you do your research and look up what the interviewing best practices are in that country, because again, the customs are definitely going to differ based on where you are. But in the US, you want to be punctual, but not too punctual for an interview. So you want to arrive ideally at least 5, but no more than 10 minutes early. If you arrive earlier than that, wait in the car. I think that's good. I like to get there like maybe 20 minutes early, just so that I can like deep breathe and relax and know that I'm there and I'm parked and I figured out where I am. And then I'll just kind of hang out in the car for 10 minutes before I walk in. If you have an interview that's like 3 hours away, oh my gosh, so many things could happen, right? Traffic, an accident that could cause a backup. There could be construction. You could get a little bit lost. I would recommend just getting there at least an hour early and then finding like a coffee shop or something nearby where you can just kind of relax. And then, 15 minutes before drive over, and then, 8 minutes before your interview, you could actually walk in. Sometimes interviewers might be delayed a little bit, so don't be, shocked if they aren't bringing you in necessarily right on the dot, but definitely be there, at the time that it's supposed to begin, and then be as flexible and understanding as possible if they're running a little bit behind. So the custom of shaking hands in the U.S. is practiced as a sign of trust and respect. I really am not sure what's going to happen with this custom because of the times we're going through now. I'm kind of curious to see if this tradition will come back or if we will start doing something new, an elbow bump. I don't know. But, if you personally don't shake hands, or if you are concerned about germs, especially today, what you can do is you can just, if someone reaches out their hand to you, you can just put your hand like to your chest and then just kind of smile and say, "It's so good to meet you. I don't personally shake hands," something like that. Like, "Oh, I don't shake hands, but I'm really glad to meet you," and make your acquaintance, so that you're affirming the person, but not making it like it. You want to still make it a positive moment, even though you're technically rejecting their hand. You can do that by just placing your hand on your heart and then showing with your words and your facial expressions that you're genuinely excited to meet them, even though you're not doing that tradition. And then personal space in the United States, the appropriate space between two people is approximately 2 feet. And we really don't do any touching except for shaking hands. And again, maybe not even that anymore. I had an employer call me once to say that a student had asked to hug her after their interview. And yeah, that's entirely inappropriate. So don't hug the interviewer. In the United States, a smile shows confidence, but also a pleasant nature, invites others to get to know you, and helps you be perceived as friendly, engaged, and excited to be there interviewing. So make sure you use a smile. And then polite small talk. Americans consider politics, religion, and personal information like weight, salary, age, etc. to be inappropriate for casual conversations. So you want to make sure you stick to safe topics. Now, there are going to be times when someone's escorting you to the watering fountain or taking you to your next interview in the elevator that you're going to want to be prepared to make small talk in addition to those interview questions, because again, they're still forming this impression of you, whether you're sitting down in the initial interview or walking to go grab some coffee in between meetings. So make sure you have some conversation starters prepared, so when you have those moments, you can still seem friendly and personable. Things like, how's your day going? The city where the job's located, or the weather. Any kind of brief small talk will work great. And then just kind of read the cues when the interviewer is ready to shift back kind of into business mode and go back into the formal interview. And then just make sure you wrap up your conversation so that you can be mindful of their time. We have Going Global through career services provided to students. So again, if you're one of those people who's interviewing in other countries, I highly recommend that you make yourself aware of the customs for that individual place. Everything from resumes versus, returning in a CV, different practices for interviewing and hiring. You will want to be aware of those things. So when you arrive for your interview, an first impression is formed in approximately the first 30 seconds, right? So an interview truly begins the moment you walk into the building. Honestly, it might even begin earlier than that. We've always all heard about the person who cuts off somebody because they're late for an interview in the parking lot, and that person turned out to be the person who was interviewing them. Not a great impression. So from the moment probably you enter the parking lot and are being kind and courteous and a responsible driver, your interview has begun. So smile, be enthusiastic, be courteous in the parking lot, holding the door open if there's someone behind you as they walk in. These are really things that I wish all people were doing anyway, but you just want to be especially cognizant on your interview day. Don't use your phone. If you check in at the lobby, of course, be friendly to the person at the front desk, even though that might not be the person interviewing you. A lot of times they'll ask everybody you encountered what their impressions of you were. And then when you sit in the lobby, I know it's really tempting to be on your phone because you're just sitting there waiting, but I would highly recommend you don't pull out your phone. Just be comfortable waiting for the interview to begin. You can certainly look down at your Padfolio if you want to look at your resume or look at your notes of the questions that you're hoping to ask. That's totally fine, but using the phone, even if it is to prepare for your interview, just gives you an impression that you seem kind of disengaged. So when you check in with a person, like I said, ask how their day's going. Read the room a little bit. If they're super busy or they're on the phone, don't ask them that, but just make sure you're being as pleasant and engaging with everyone you encounter as possible. When you enter the interview room, again, keep up your enthusiasm and your energy. A lot of times this helps you push past some of your nervousness. And if possible, shake hands with each individual in the room. Depends on the room layout, and again, depends on the times. I'm really not sure if this custom is going to continue. And then make sure that you engage all the people in the interview, not just the person who's asking the question or the person you perceive to have the most authority. Even if only one person is posing the questions, Still make eye contact and engage everyone as you respond. Always use your first and last name when you introduce yourself. Yes, they probably see that on your resume, but again, you want them to remember you. They're interviewing other people, so make sure you just constantly use your first and last name. Don't place a bunch of your personal belongings on the interview table if there is one. A phone, a briefcase, water bottle, coffee cup, that's going to look real, just kind of junk all around you, and you want that crisp, clean, professional image. So you could put like your folder on the table, but everything else I recommend you just set down on the floor by the chair. Make sure your cell phone is off. Honestly, I would recommend you just keep your cell phone in the car. I think that you can go the length of your interview without being reachable through your phone. I think it would be okay. And I think that would just help not have to worry about it going off or getting to be a distraction. And then use strong verbal and nonverbal communication skills during the interview. So what are some examples of nonverbal communication and verbal communication? For nonverbal, you want, again, I can't emphasize this enough, smile, make eye contact, and keep an open body language. You don't want to like have your arms crossed or seem super closed off. Sit straight up with good posture, right? Don't, sometimes you think, oh, if I kind of slouch or put my elbows up on the table, I'll seem more confident, but it kind of just makes you seem like you don't respect the situation or aren't interested. So make sure you sit up straight with good posture. Kind of find that balance between too stiff and overly animated. Don't do a lot of fidgeting or crossing your legs or wringing your hands. Try not to flail your arms. Be sure to engage all the interviewers in the room, as I said. And then remember that pausing and taking breaths is completely natural. So just be comfortable with silence. You don't want to have like a deer in the headlights look when you aren't talking, but if you're genuinely silent because you're thinking of what to say next, just do something that indicates that you're thinking, like, or, looking off to the side and kind of cocking your head like it looks like you're thinking up a response, so it's not so awkward. For verbal communication, you want to keep a positive, optimistic tone, even when you're answering negative questions. Avoid getting defensive. So if you're responding like I already said, or they ask, why do you think you're good for this job? And you say, I meet all the qualifications. Yeah, that just kind of shows that you don't really know what the purpose of an interview is. You're not supposed to get defensive about the questions. You're supposed to seize them as opportunities to explain your qualifications. Avoid excessive fillers. Okay, they can form the impression that you aren't confident. Avoid excessive intensifiers. If something's very, very great over and over and over again, it's going to kind of seem like you're exaggerating. And then avoid excessive qualifiers. So again, if you're feeling like not super confident and they're asking you about your experience with, say, Word, and you say, oh, I just have done stuff with Word docs. Don't minimize your experience. Talk up the experience that you do have. Don't embellish or lie, again, but don't minimize what you actually are bringing to the table. So when you answer an interview question, I first want you to just listen to the entire question being presented, and then just take a quick second to replay the question in your mind, or if you can pull it off out loud, right? I've kind of gotten good at that because sometimes in the moment you can kind of zone out, or like you start answering and then you don't really remember what the question was because you're getting asked questions the whole time. It can get, mentally it's a lot. So if they're asking, share about a time when you worked with a team to achieve a goal, then I might say, okay, you want me to share about a time when I worked with others to complete a goal. Okay, here's an example. So it kind of helps me out loud to say it so that I'm engaging them, but it's buying me that quick minute to collect my thoughts and decide which example I'm going to go with. And then when you respond, remember to make eye contact, keep a positive tone, energy, and again, engaging all the interviewers in the room. And be conversational, right? There's no way to predict what you'll be asked, and they don't expect expect you to be a robot. So you can ask follow-up questions or clarifying questions. Maybe you didn't totally catch the question, or you weren't sure about, a word that they used. It was kind of industry jargon that you want to clarify. That's totally fine. And then if you have that dreaded moment where your mind drew a blank, you accidentally checked out, you're trying to collect your thoughts, here are some tactics you can use. So ask to have the question repeated. Could you please repeat the question for me? Restate the question like I just did. So you'd like to tell me about a time when ... Communicate that you're thinking it over. Gosh, that's a good question. Let me think about that for a moment. Show that you're thinking, let me think about that one. Ask a clarifying question. So by this software, did you mean, this term? And by that, did you mean in the context of what I would do if I was in that situation, or what I have done in that situation? These are just examples of how you could ask clarifying questions. And then you have a one-time lifeline, which is ask if you can come back to the question. Don't do that more than once, but if you're really in a pinch and you really can't think of anything, just go ahead and say, would you mind if we come back to that question? So what are some common interview questions that are likely to be asked? There are a few different types of questions. The first one is standard. So things like, tell me about yourself. What attracted you to our organization? Why did you apply? Where do you see yourself in 5 years, etc. Those can be positive or negative, right? So they might ask, what are your weaknesses? What's your biggest regret? Things like that you think on your toes, but you're always ending your negative questions with a positive. So what did you learn from it? How do you do this differently from now on? Always flip it to end on a positive. Then there's behavioral questions, things that are going to ask you to reflect on your previous work and school experiences and taking them through a detailed account of how you handled specific situations. Describe a time when, share about a time when. The reason why those are so popular is because the interviewer is trying to get to know you as well as possible in a limited amount of time, and the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior. So kind of think about that on their end when you're coming up with the examples, because I know it can seem a little tedious, like, why are they asking me all of this? But really, you are getting a chance to showcase what you've done in the past, and that's going to help them intuit and connect the dots of, wow, they did this in the past, then I can trust them at our organization to do the right thing with us, or to use that talent, or to use that skill, or to, be an awesome teammate, whatever the question is alluding to. And then finally, there's technical questions. These are typically more when you've advanced to the more advanced interview rounds. Questions that are specific to the role, that assess how you meet qualifications. It's also a way for hiring managers to eliminate candidates who were embellishing or lying about their technical abilities on their resumes. So if you're going to put on there that you're fluent in another language, there very well could be an interviewer who's interviewing you in that language and will quickly be able to tell if you truly are fluent. So again, always make sure you're being honest about your abilities, but also presenting them in a confident way. So being proud of and confident in the way that you do project what you do have, but never lying or embellishing or making up things that you don't. Practice, practice, practice. Take time to think about how you're going to respond to typical interview questions. There are some interview questions that they will be asked in some form or another that you should be trying to prepare for, right? You may assume that you can answer any interview question, but believe me, until you attempt to verbalize your thoughts out loud, you really cannot determine if your responses are concise, clear, and effective. Continue to register for mock interview days, like I said, and make appointments with a career counselor for going over interviewing techniques or mock interview appointments. So now I'll just kind of shift into how do we answer some of these specific types of questions in an interview and what techniques we can use. So when it comes to tell me about yourself, it's going to be like an extended version of your elevator pitch. You don't need to include super personal information or anything they wouldn't legally be able to ask you. So really protect yourself. So it acts kind of like an opening statement for the rest of your interview. Kind of sort of builds a foundation for the rest of your interview. So when you're talking about yourself, it's talking about your professional self. So you can give your current position or your major, an overview of your previous experience, and then again, emphasizing the qualities that make you a great fit. You definitely want to end with expressing that you appreciate the opportunity to interview with our organization today. Don't worry about like, oh, I guess I can't say anything that I put in my cover letter because that would be redundant. Oh my gosh, no, you need to continue going back through. So if you used a big example in your cover letter, you can absolutely have free reign to keep talking about that in the interview. That's what got you the interview. And then don't worry about like preemptively answering a subsequent interview question in the tell me about yourself response. Tell me about yourself is like a very like summary, right, of your experience, and then when they ask subsequent questions, you can delve much deeper and then bring out your awesome specific examples to fortify those subsequent responses. So when it comes to these behavioral interviewing questions, I'm going to give you some tactics for that. But quickly, if you're asked about a situation that you've honestly never experienced before, you have two options. So let's say they're asking, tell me about a time that you failed a test. And you might say, honestly, I've never had the experience of failing a test, but if I did, this is what I would do, right? So that was like your hypothetical. Or you can say, honestly, I've never experienced failing a test, but one time I forgot my mom's birthday, and this is how I handled that. So there you're kind of offering a parallel situation, not exactly the same, but that they'll still be able to kind of learn from your past behavior, the kind of person you are and what you would do. So for behavioral questions, you really want to use the STAR technique. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So to set up the situation, you really want to go a little bit into the who, what, when, where, why. Just enough detail for them to make sense of what you're talking about, but not too much that you start rambling or become verbose. And then you want to set up the task. So this is the concrete task you had to complete or the exact issue or problem you needed to solve. And then you're going to go ahead and talk about the action. So describe the actions that you took. And then you want to explain the result and then always quantify the outcome if possible. So if you find yourself answering a question and you're like, I don't really know where this is going, I don't really even remember what the question was, and I'm sitting here talking, this is just a nice way to mentally ground your responses and kind of remember like, okay, I've given the situation the task. Okay, I need to talk about the action and then wrap it up with the result. So here is an example. Describe a time when you went above and beyond for a customer. So here is an example where I wrote out one of my responses and I highlighted them as situation, task, action, and result. So situation, I've said, as I mentioned earlier, when I told you about myself, I previously worked in a retail at Stella's baby and toddler clothing store where I was committed to demonstrating exceptional customer service. Task. One day, a customer was shopping for her infant triplets, and when I offered her shopping assistance, she expressed frustration that she needed 3 matching dresses for their family photo, but we only had 2 dresses in stock that were the right size. She was also concerned because she hoped to use a 25% off coupon that was going to expire that day. I validated her concerns and I asked if she could wait a few minutes while I called another store. Action. I wanted the customer to have a positive shopping experience, so I called our sister store in a neighboring city to ask if they had the dress in the size she needed. They did, so I partnered with my manager to have the dress shipped from that store to ours, completing the order over the phone so that she could still use her coupon before it expired. And the result? The customer was so appreciative and told us that she'd been trying to find outfits for the family photo all day. She said no other store had been as helpful and caring as we were, and she became one of our best customers after that. So there I've told you a story about basically a frustrated customer and how I was able to try to meet her needs. And while I was telling the story, I made sure that I added in statements about myself, right? So especially if I was giving this answer and the position I was applying for was customer service based, you can see what I've done here. You know, I worked at Stella's, where I was committed to demonstrating exceptional customer service. A customer presented a problem and I validated her concerns. Okay, I needed to take action, and you know, I wanted to make sure I went above and beyond for the customer. And then with the result, you know, thankfully, because of what we've done, she became one of our best customers. Then also the interviewer can take away that this interviewee knows, like, she couldn't make the call, right, without calling her manager to make sure it was okay to arrange the whole mailing and the coupon over the phone and all that. So it also tells them that she knows kind of boundaries and understands when is it appropriate to approach her manager about something. So I've given the interviewer all of this stuff that they can take away just by answering this simple question. And that's why you really want to think kind of what they're looking for when you're brainstorming your responses and plugging in your experience. So what are some strategies for the what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses questions? So you remember, you always want to explain the strengths are, provide concrete examples. And then for a weakness, you want to focus on skills rather than personal traits. So something that would be inappropriate to say as a weakness is, I can't stop biting my nails, right? That's way too personal. But it's also not helpful to do like a personality trait that you don't really have control over either. You know, so we really recommend that you pick a skill that you're genuinely working to improve and that you can express that as a weakness, but then what you do is you flip it around and then focus the rest of your response on the concrete ways that you're working to cope with that weakness or improve it, and so that it ends on a positive, showing you're aware that this is a weakness and you're actively working to improve it. So if you're looking for additional common questions that you can use to help you prepare, there are plenty on our website. Also, if you prepare for interview questions and you want them to be related to the specific jobs you'll apply for after graduation, we have the jobinterviewquestions.com available through our website for you to access as well. When conducting a job search, it's really important that federal legislation prohibits interviewers from making hiring decisions based on certain information concerning age, national origin, race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, citizenship, and certain physical data. So you want to be aware, you know, there are sometimes, you know, not ethical questions getting asked, especially if it's, you know, an employer that's acting unethically. So always be aware, like you are, of you know, the fact that there are some bad people out there. So if you are asked an illegal question, for example, if someone asked you, are you planning to become engaged or married in the next year? It's really up to you whether you answer the question or not, but I want you to be prepared and be able to recognize an illegal question when it's posed. So if I was asked that question, I would kind of just say, can you explain how this question relates to the qualifications for the position or its responsibilities? If you could explain how it's related, I would be able to respond. But more importantly, you would want to alert career services immediately, because that's not okay. And we really vet our employers, especially with the jobs that get posted on Handshake. So please let us know so that we can look into it further. If you're wondering what are acceptable versus unacceptable questions, here is a nice guide. So it's completely acceptable for an employer to ask you if you're over the age of 18, if you're hired, can you furnish proof of age? An unacceptable way of asking that would be, what is your date of birth and how old are you? If they ask you, have you ever been convicted of a crime? That's totally acceptable. If they ask you if you've ever been arrested, not so much. So at the end of the interview, they'll probably ask if there's anything else you want them to know about you, and make sure that you take that opportunity to, again, reiterate your interest in the position and the company and re-summarize why you're a great fit. That's a great thing to do at the end to help them remember you. An interviewer might also ask what questions you have for them. You always need to ask questions. Typically, we recommend at least 4 to 5 questions. Okay. I know that when you haven't had a lot of work experience, trying to think of 4 to 5 questions can seem super daunting. So I recommend that you prepare questions and think of them beforehand. Some of them might get answered in the course of the interview, so just make sure you have some. Once you start working, the questions part becomes a little bit more natural, because once you've been working, you genuinely do have more understanding of how things work and processes. So you'll be curious to find out how this company does it, if it's the same way as your other company had done it. But as a student, I acknowledge it's hard to come up with 4 to 5 questions, so prepare them ahead. And then, in the question part, after you're done answering, asking your questions, again, just reiterate your interest, thank them so much for the honor of interviewing with them, and then make sure that you send a thank you card or email within 24 hours. So here are some sample questions to ask at the end of the interview. How did the position become open? How would you describe the management style in this organization? I read about this on your website. Could you tell me more about that? What would you hope the person who fulfills this position to accomplish in the first few months? Are there opportunities for additional training and education? And then, of course, what are the next steps in the process? Be sure to write that thank you card or email within 24 hours. Try to send a separate one to every person you spoke with that day. State your first and last name. Reiterate your continued interest in the position and organization if you are still interested. I mean, if something's happened during the interview and you're not interested at all, you could certainly withdraw your name from consideration. But if you are still interested, make sure you reiterate that in your thank you card. Express gratitude. Mention something specific that you particularly enjoyed discussing. Again, this helps them remember you, helps you stand out from the other candidates. And then always end with offering to provide any further information they might require. Some other interview styles. There's a directive interview. That's the most typical. The interviewer has a set agenda. You do most of the talking, and then they give you a chance to ask questions at the end. There's also something called a stress interviewer, where the interviewer wants to get a sense of how you process problems and maybe act under pressure. So they might ask you like a brain teaser kind of a question, or stage an interruption to give you the opportunity to demonstrate your adaptability. These kinds of things definitely align with whatever field you're going in. For example, if you're going into sales, they might say, sell me this pen right now, and then just see how you work on the fly. A non-directive interview is where the interviewer kind of is just asking very open-ended questions to judge your level of preparation and assertiveness. This could also be an interviewing strategy when the interviewer wants to promote a casual atmosphere to kind of get you to let your guard down and see if you'll continue to maintain your professionalism. And then finally, there's case study interviews. This is when an interviewer presents you with a scenario and might ask you to provide your input or how you would walk through and approach the situation. These help the interviewer assess your analytical skills, creativity, and the ability to frame and structure problems, kind of get insight into your thought process. So that concludes my presentation on interviewing. I know that was a lot of ground to cover. If you're left feeling like you still have questions or need assistance, you can schedule an appointment with Career Services and say that you just want to discuss interviewing techniques if you just have questions about interviewing in general. Or if you're like, nope, I'm ready to get my feet wet, I want to go ahead and do a mock interview, you can call us and schedule that. And in that case, just make sure you mention the field or the company or the job that you're interested in, and we will tailor it to you. Otherwise, I highly recommend that you log into Handshake and register for our mock interview days, those 30-minute general interview questions that you'll answer with a real employer and get that feedback. That's really helpful as well. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks.